sir. Let's go.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Is this on? Yes? Good afternoon. This is, I'm Gil Cedillo. This is the Immigrant Affairs, Civil Rights, and Equity Committee. This is April 4th, 2019, 1 p.m. We are at City Hall. We are not in the chambers today. We are in room 1010. Yes. Thank all of you for joining us today. We're going to begin with, is there public comment? Yes? We go to item 2. No public comment on item 1. Public comment on number 2. Rob Kwan. Oh, there you are. Rob, you want to join us? Carlos Amador. And Lindsey Toslowski. Did I say that right?
Not really.
No?
Close enough.
That's all right.
Very close.
How would you say it?
Toslowski.
Toslowski.
It's easier just not to look at it when you say it.
Okay. Well, not the first time. It's impossible the first time. Amanda Schuft. How did I do with that?
Good.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So we're going a minute each. Mr. Kwan, please.
Thank you for scheduling this item today and making sure we're discussing this before the budget gets proposed. We need to hear from this committee that you're going to renew the commitment to the Justice Fund and ensure the mayor includes it in his next budget. We'd love to see you move towards universal representation and end the carve-outs. Due process protects all, and we need to live up to that. Ask you to remove the residency requirements. We really want to see this committee ask about what kind of administrative time is being wasted on carve-outs and residency requirements. We stepped up 2 years ago, but the federal government has stepped down many times. They're working just as hard as we are to undermine everything we're doing, and hope that you actually move beyond this, because the Justice Fund is a central component of this city moving forward and protecting our immigrant community. But a year ago, we're talking about the LA SAFE ordinance that our immigrant affairs advocates introduced, and would love to hear that conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Senor Amador.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking on this item. Carlos Amador. I'm a resident in the 12th District, also a board member in the Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council. I'm also here to speak in support of the item, the LA Justice Fund. All of us worked, and folks here in the room and many others worked really hard to see this item become a reality. This fund go into effect and change the lives of many residents and many people here in the city and the county as well. And I also want to support the efforts to remove the residency requirement to make it easier for members of the community to be able to benefit from this service, as well as making sure that we are representing and providing the due process for everyone by removing the carve-out placed on it in regards to the criminal conviction. So thank you so much, Carlos Amador, and I am here in support of LA Justice Fund. Thank you.
Carlos, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lindsey Toslowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. We're one of the organizations that stepped up 2 years ago and launched a program to support and to be beneficiaries of the LA Justice Fund. We have a team that's at Adelanto every single day. And if many of you have never been to Adelanto, I would ask that you come up and see what a place it is that is completely devoid of hope. But the LA Justice Fund and the attorneys, especially who are part of the Detain Collaborative, have really been going up there and bringing hope to a hopeless place and really demonstrating LA values and that we are an inclusive city, that we are welcoming. So I would ask you not only to continue with the support financially for this program, but also to expand it. As my colleagues have mentioned, the residency requirements make it very difficult for the work that we're doing in Tijuana with people who are asylum seekers, who have family members who live here in Los Angeles. When they get detained in Adelanto or in the Orange County facilities, we're unable to represent them currently. So we would ask for an expansion. Thank you.
So are you suggesting that a nexus between residents in the city would suffice?
Yes. Not in every case, but that would be better than currently where we are unable to do that, even if your mom or your dad or your sister live here.
Okay. Please.
Thank you. My name is Amanda Shefton. I'm the managing attorney for the Los Angeles Justice Fund program at Immigrant Defenders Law Center. I want to thank you for your commitment to protecting LA's immigrant communities, and I'm here to urge you to renew your commitment because otherwise LA families will continue to be torn apart. For example, our client Lucia, who's an LA resident for close to 2 decades and is the mother of 2 children. Lucia is an HIV positive survivor of sexual assault and childhood sex slavery and trafficking. She fled to the U.S. as a teenager with her infant daughter. When we met her at Adelanto detention facility, she was terrified of deportation and scared of telling her story. Eventually, with the assurance of counsel by her side, we learned about her traumatic past and prepared her asylum claim and won her case. After spending nearly a year detained at Adelanto detention facility away from her children, she was released with asylum status in the United States and reunited with her children. Thank you.
Congratulations. Mariana Magaña, Dalia Inlander, Alejandra Morales, Deborah Falb.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Mariana Magaña, and I'm here with the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, also known as CHIRLA. We're here to ask that, in light of the sunset date for the LA Justice Fund, to respectfully call for the City of Los Angeles to renew the funds as they have been vital to representation for our immigrant community. As we know, LA County is currently the 6th county in the country where ICE arrests are heavily concentrated, and unlike criminal proceedings, our immigrant community do not have the right to court-appointed counsel. In LA County, approximately 60% of detained individuals and 26% of non-detained individuals lack legal counsel, and it has been demonstrated that those who have legal representation are 5 more times likely to win their case. Furthermore, we understand that the program was created and swiftly moved to its implementation due to the urgency behind this matter, but we call for the city to closely look at the criminal carve-out once again and the residency requirement. We also have other recommendations that we can also submit in writing, and we thank you once again and look forward to engaging in conversation about this.
Thank you.
Do you have the recommendations with you?
I will send them.
Hi, my name is Talia Inlander. I'm a supervising staff attorney at Public Counsel. We are a member of the Los Angeles Justice Fund Detained Collaborative. And day in and day out, we're hearing from LA City residents whose loved ones are detained by ICE at Adelanto. Before Justice Fund, we had no real capacity to respond. The city's support has really changed that. Just a few examples. We represent an orphan who came to the United States from Honduras with a pending special immigrant juvenile petition who was detained at Adelanto for months before we intervened and were able to get him out on bond. A Salvadoran man who's lived in Los Angeles since he was a child who suffers from schizophrenia and was picked up by ICE when he was participating in a mental health program ordered by the court and thrown into Adelanto. We cannot go back to the days of turning these community members away, particularly with the administration's ongoing assault on immigrants. Now more than ever, the city needs to defend all of its community members, including those with convictions, and the right to due process by ensuring the continuity of the Justice Fund. Thank you.
Deborah.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Morales. I'm here in representation of CARES and the Central American Research Center. We're here to compel you to continue to commit to financing the LA Justice Fund. However, at the same time, it's very important to continue to work with organizations funded and working on deportation defense across LA County and beyond to ensure that we are improving and refining the very vision that we had when we wanted to start the LA Justice Fund together. At the same time, like many of my other colleagues here have mentioned, it is very important to revisit and to commit to ensuring that we are protecting and guaranteeing due process for all immigrants. That is the very reason why LA Justice Fund was created, to ensure that those most vulnerable and those not having access to representation are able to do that. However, the residency requirement and the criminal carve-out are impeding from that actually happening to all individuals that are needed. Caresen has opened now an office in San Bernardino and Adelanto, and that just comes to show that the need for more holistic representation approach to this issue needs to continue to be worked together with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Deborah Falb, and I'm a resident of CD1, and I'm here on behalf of Indivisible Highland Park. I don't work in this space professionally every day, but I'm here just to make a plea for fairness. The people who are helped by the LA Justice Fund are people who have often done their time or have done nothing wrong. And everybody in this country deserves the benefit of counsel. It's a basic human right, a basic constitutional right, and anything that this committee and that this city and county can do to ensure that all of our residents and all of their family members are able to benefit from professional help in such a difficult and complex area is worthwhile. So taking away the carve-outs, taking away the residency requirements, as others have requested, seems to be the basic minimum level of fairness, as well as helping other people who are already being helped and continuing to help those people. So I hope you will all do that. Thank you.
Who's next? Who signed up? Meath, Sony? I did. Van Wyn, Andres Juan. Are you signed up twice?
Yes, this is an accident, sir.
Okay. Let me put it that way. Please proceed.
Good afternoon. My name is Meath Sony. I'm the co-legal director at the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. I just wanted to...
Are you guys a 501c3?
Yes. And we're here in Los Angeles. We are the largest deportation defense provider in the West Coast. And I wanted to actually just quickly follow up with what my colleague Amanda Sheft was sharing with you, the incredible story of our client Lucia, who's an LA resident. She spent a year in Adelanto, practically a year, before we were able to get her released and reunited with her 2 children. In 5 years, Lucia is going to become eligible to become a citizen. Before our representation, Lucia was just another body for ICE to deport, and they would have deported her if it wasn't for our intervention, made possible thanks to all of you who've committed yourself to funding the LA Justice Fund. But now more than ever, there's many more Lucias who are in detention and who we can't get to because of the criminal carve-out. It's imperative that the LA City join the Safe Cities Network and commit ourselves to universal representation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ving Nguyen with the Weingartz Foundation. The Weingartz Foundation is a funding partner with the LA Justice Fund, and we frequently partner with the city in innovative programs that support equity, inclusion, and opportunity. We applaud the city for its commitment to our immigrant communities, and we believe that the LA Justice Fund is an historic and innovative public-private partnership. The Weingartz Foundation is committed to continued support of the LA Justice Fund, which we consider a critical part of the safety net that is keeping families and communities together at this critical time. We are also committed to ensuring that we continue to educate and encourage our colleagues in philanthropy to learn about the Justice Fund and support this valuable program. Thank you.
Andres Juan, ACLU. From the Muslim ban, family separation, and the wall, to trying to end DACA and TPS, we've seen the extent to which the Trump administration has tried to dehumanize our fellow human beings, our neighbors right here in Los Angeles. And we must stand up to these attacks. We cannot give free rein to the Trump administration's America First immigration agenda, which, let's call it for what it is racist, unconstitutional, immoral, especially the separation of families, not just at the border, but right here in Los Angeles. That's why at a bare minimum, we need to ensure the continuity of the LA Justice Fund, fund it to the fullest extent, eliminate the carve-out, eliminate the funding cap for each organization, eliminate the residency requirement, so we can build a sustainable, universal representation program as part of the Safe Cities Network. Finally, we must enshrine Executive Directive 20 into law and go beyond it and go beyond SB 54 so that we're not a city of sanctuary just in name only, but in law.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, all of you, for being here, sharing your perspectives. Let me introduce the committee. Neri Martinez is here with us today. Karen Price has joined us. David Rue. So we're at quorum. Are we ready for item number 1?
Thank you. Item number 1 is a Housing and Community Investment Department report in response to motion Martinez-Cedillo relative to the status of the Human Trafficking Shelter Pilot Program.
Good afternoon, council members. Abigail Marquez, Assistant General Manager with the Housing and Community Investment Department.
Sandra Cervantes, Program Monitor with the Housing and Community Investment Department.
I want to acknowledge Councilmember Nuri Martinez for her leadership in identifying the need to have a more coordinated response on how we are addressing the unique needs of human trafficking survivors. Through a request for proposals, HSID in 2008 identified the Coalition to Abolish Sex Trafficking and Slavery, CAST, as a human trafficking shelter provider for both the emergency shelter and the transitional shelter. I want to also underscore that this is a first of its kind in the country, and we should be very proud of this as a undertaking. The mayor and council allocated $800,000 in the general fund to support both the emergency and the transitional shelter program for human trafficking survivors. Currently, the funding support 15 emergency shelter beds and 10 transitional shelter beds, which translate to serving approximately 55 people each year through the shelter program, the shelter-based program. It's also important to acknowledge that CAST is also leveraging this funding to serve approximately an additional 100 survivors in their non-shelter programming. So they provide a lot of resources and support, both shelter and in non-shelter services. They provide support to access to health care, supportive counseling, education-related workforce development opportunities, life skills training, and many other services. It's also important to underscore that this is also addressing our homeless crisis in the city, as CAST has reported that this year alone, through their emergency shelter program, 100% of the referrals were women who were homeless. Since July of 2018, July 1st of 2018, which is when the program year began, CAST has housed 12 survivors at the transitional shelter and 34 survivors at the emergency shelter. We are seeing great progress thus far. CAST is reporting that 95% of their clients will be able to increase their safety. This year alone, 80% of their clients will be able to increase their knowledge of available resources. Again, resources that or life skills that we take for granted, such as learning how to get on a bus and access public transportation, especially for women who have been in captivity for many, many months or even years. 65% will be able to participate in activities leading to increased social support and decreased isolation. 50% of the clients will be able to maintain or increase their income, and 80% of the clients are expected to transition into either permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, or other safe, stable housing. We're very proud of this partnership with CAST. CAST is a leader, not just in the Los Angeles County area, but across the country and internationally. We know that on any given day, there's approximately 10,000 survivors that are being, women and men that are being trafficked, both labor and sex trafficked. And we, as at HSID, are looking to enhance the delivery of this program. We have worked with the Hospitality Training Academy recently to apply for state funding to launch a very specific workforce development program for human trafficking survivors and domestic violence survivors. We also secured a private funding from City Community Development to increase the financial capability of both human trafficking and domestic violence survivors. We're going to be hosting the first ever Survivors Financial Wealth Summit this coming July. We'd love to partner with you, Councilmember Martinez, and the members of the City Council. So we are monitoring the shelter on a regular basis. Sandra is a program analyst. We're going out there to look at their operations very regularly, even beyond what is required for this kind of program. We're working hand in hand with the organization. We're here to answer any additional questions if you have any.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
First of all, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I also want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for scheduling this motion and for supporting me by seconding the motion as well. I hope that the goal today of the committee is that we hear from you on the impacts of this program, which you just covered, but also how we can improve it and ultimately start the conversation about how we transition into a more permanent program, which is what I would love to see in my tenure on the City Council. I think this is a community that has often been forgotten. And we often don't think of these individuals or these women, for the majority are women, as victims. And so I think we have to continue to tell society and tell law enforcement that these are victims. No one that I know or have ever met as young as 12 and 13 years old do not want to stand on a corner on Sepulveda and Vano and selling their body for sex, to some 50-year-old guy. I mean, that's just incomprehensible to me. But I do want you to walk this committee through how you're accepting clients in both the emergency and the transitional shelters. Are you referring them to CAST or to another organization? What does that look like?
CAST is handling the referrals, so CAST is the only organization that has a 24-hour hotline specific for human trafficking survivors. So they are handling, that's part of the funding that we support. They have a hotline. They do receive a percentage, although it's not as high as I expected it to be. About 7% of the referrals are coming in from law enforcement. Okay. And then there's also referrals that are coming in from the hotline. There's referrals that are coming in from LHSA or from homeless service agencies.
And Abigail, is that both the emergency and transitional? Both of them are being handled by CAST?
Yes, correct.
And the report mentions 31 human trafficking survivors were denied shelter due to lack of space. And that's concerning to me. That's 31 too many. So what are you doing to connect the survivors to additional resources to make sure they don't fall through the cracks? Is there a wait list that we're putting them on so we can access them and know where they're at so that we can bring them in? What does that look like?
So that is a concern of ours as well, and we're challenged with that also with the domestic violence program. We don't have enough beds to be able to respond to the crisis. This is definitely a step in that direction. What CAST has been doing has been, they are connecting with a DV partner to house them. They are connecting to the continuum of care through LHSA's network of agencies to house them. I think one opportunity is for us to identify flexible funding so that they can, if they can, put them in a hotel temporarily until they work out a situation. But there's multiple approaches that we're exploring. We're building the capacity of our DV field, so we will be offering human trafficking training for the very first time in a coordinated manner to our DV agencies that we are supporting through other funding, so that there is a coordinated approach to how we're going to respond to the needs of human trafficking survivors. It's an ongoing challenge, but there is an absolute commitment to address it.
I think that even among providers, the argument can be made that victims of trauma can look very different. Absolutely. And so the only reason I'm concerned about this is there's 31 individuals that we weren't able to meet their needs. And the DV community is very different than our human trafficking community. And sometimes, often, because we lack resources, they have to compete against each other, and it shouldn't be that way. Correct. Because these victims have experienced different types of trauma, and to house them in the same type of housing or provide the same type of resources sometimes isn't fair for that victim. So I just want us to constantly revisit that because it looks very different.
Yes, and we absolutely acknowledge that. The intent behind the training is to also increase the capacity of the DV field to understand those very unique challenges. And some of our DV agencies do have a separate shelter program for like 1736 and Genesee. They do have some experience working with human trafficking survivors. The goal is to at least increase the level of acknowledgement that there is a different need for human trafficking survivors and how we can begin, again, to be better coordinated with how we're responding.
Okay, I have two more questions, Mr. Chair, before we move on. You mentioned CAST, and I think I'd be remiss not to remind this committee of what an extraordinary work those group of women do for survivors. I know they secured 2 grants for $987,000, almost $1 million, and some of it is to expand their legal services and offer housing subsidies. And can you elaborate more about this? In terms of their legal services, I guess since we have the Justice Fund on our agenda this afternoon, Are they providing any immigration services as well to any of the victims?
Yes, absolutely.
What does that look like?
And there is a huge need. There's a lot of connection between human trafficking survivors and a lot of, I don't know the percentage offhand, but a huge percentage of survivors have immigration. Our immigrants are undocumented and have a number of
And they have
challenges.
trained immigration attorneys on staff?
Yes, they do work. They do provide extensive immigration-related services, both on the services and representation. They have a capacity to address the needs. I believe it's over 100 languages that they are able to assess and provide support to people that have over 100 languages available to them.
Okay, my last question, Mr. Chair, before we move on is, has HSID submitted your budget request for the upcoming budget of 2019-2020?
Yes, we did. We did in November, and we did include, again, a request for level funding, $800,000, to continue to support this work.
So you're only requesting $800,000 this year for
Yes.
to continue this work? Okay, maybe we can talk about increasing that. Thanks.
We would love to, yes.
That's it, thank you.
Colleagues?
I just want to move after after the committee members ask their questions, I do want to move on this item. I have a request.
Sure.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Champion.
Appreciate your leadership and that of Councilwoman Nuri on this issue. Nuri, thank you much. It's such a need. It's a big need. It's a citywide need. For me, some things like this, location. Can you tell us where this shelter is without providing any
breaching security concerns?
Yes, those security concerns. Just curious about kind of what part of town it's in, and what do you think the prospects are of getting a similar facility in maybe another part of town, consistent with the funding challenges and requirements that we have, but how you're thinking about maybe just replicating and expanding this much needed service.
We welcome the opportunity to explore ways to expand. We do feel strongly that this is a step in the right direction, but it's far from addressing the overall need. And the shelters are in confidential locations. They're in 2 specific regions of the city. Probably can tell you where they're not.
Without being specific, can you say kind of
South and the west side of the city, and but what is important to underscore is that anyone from anywhere in the city can access the shelter program. So they don't. It's not tied to if they're from that particular area.
I understand. I'm just talking about in terms of ease of getting there. I mean, sometimes that might be a challenge.
CAST will actually meet the survivor where they are, and they will transport them to the shelter. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? A motion?
Yeah, I do. So first of all, I think we should note and file the HSID report, so I want to make sure we do that. But I also want to instruct HSID to report on report annually with updates on the status of the shelter program, and additionally instruct the CAO to report in 30 days with funding options to transition the pilot program into a permanent one. Without objection?
Yes, I'm making sure that they have the notes.
Thank you. I do. Thank
Go
you.
with that?
Yes.
We're all good. Without objection, so move. So be the order. Colleagues?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Nice job, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 2.
Thank you. Item number 2 is a discussion item, a presentation by the California Community Foundation relative to the Justice Fund and related matters.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Rosie Arroyo, Senior Program Officer for the California Community Foundation, focused on immigration.
Hi, I'm Stacy Strongaroni. I'm direct the California office for the Vera Institute of Justice.
So thank you so much for the invitation to provide an update on the LA Justice Fund. Today, I have the honor to be joined by my colleague Stacy Strongaroni with the Vera Institute of Justice's California office to help also answer any questions you might have. As you know, Vera has been playing a key role in the LA Justice Fund in helping to evaluate the program. And so for today, as you have in front of you a brief presentation on the LA Justice Fund, I will try to go over it briefly. I know we have limited time, but we are certainly happy to touch base on any key points that you'd like us to focus on. But before I go into the presentation, I do want to, just on behalf of CCF, express our deep appreciation to all the LA Justice Fund partners that make this program possible. This program has been a true collaborative effort every step of the way, and I would like to thank the LA Justice Fund funding partners, the City of LA, the County of Los Angeles, the Weingartz Foundation, who is here today, and also our grantee community partners that are working at the forefront of this issue, providing the highest protections to our most vulnerable Angelinos. At CCF, we're also very extremely happy with the outcomes and progress of the LA Justice Fund and see this as an important step to meet the needs of our most vulnerable communities here in the city and in the county. As such, on behalf of all our LA Justice Fund partners, I'm pleased to report on the program's accomplishments and successes to date. So just going into the presentation, if you look at going to the second slide, just want to share a very brief background that the LA Justice Fund was first announced in December 2016 as an innovative multi-million-dollar public-private partnership between the city, the county, the Weingartz Foundation, and the California Community Foundation to address the pressing demands for legal representation services for the most vulnerable immigrants. But by July of 2017, the city and the county adopted the policy framework for the implementation of the LA Justice Fund, a framework that was focused on servicing the most vulnerable populations facing the threat of deportation. The program supports key strategies that help to bolster direct legal representation, capacity building to strengthen the removal defense pipeline, and also looking for opportunities to expand the pro bono coordination and partnerships. And so in October of 2018, after a rigorous review process, we were able, actually October 2017, we were able to release the first set of grants for the LA Justice Fund. Going on to the next slide, we know that there is high demand right now for deportation defense, removal defense programs. Given the significant increase that we are seeing in immigration enforcement, the data shows that LA County is ground zero, having the highest need for deportation defense. More than one local fund alone, we know, cannot tackle the need all on its own, but we know that programs like the Justice Fund can make a significant difference. Many, we know, according to the data, go through the immigration court process without lawyers. In LA County, 68% of detained immigrants and 27% of non-detained immigrants are unrepresented in their removal proceedings. And we all know that representation matters because immigrants with lawyers are 5 times more likely to succeed in their cases. And so over time, we've seen just a dramatic increase in immigration enforcement and see that Los Angeles and the city of Los Angeles, also there's a very high vulnerable population. Going to the next slide, we know that these individuals also play an integral part in their communities, their families, and the economy. Immigrants represent 43% of the county's workforce. They contribute $232 billion to the gross domestic product and $7.9 billion in taxes. In the city of Los Angeles, nearly 1 in 4 workers within the city's 2 million worker labor force is a non-citizen. Going into the next slide. This slide here really is just a snapshot of what we're seeing in terms of immigration enforcement. And so according to recent data, we see that ICE has aggressively increased interior immigration enforcement with arrests and deportations up by about 42%. The number of removals rose by 37% just in 2016. 69% of ICE arrests nationwide were based on transfers from the criminal justice system, mostly state prisons or local jails. 24 of the 3,200 counties across the nation see around half of all of ICE's community arrests. But just 10 counties saw around 28% of ICE community arrests, and half of all the raids were conducted in just 24 counties. And so if you see in the chart in front of you, it shows counties with most ICE community arrests in fiscal year 2018. And you see that, California has a number of counties with some of the highest numbers, helping to reinforce again why the critical need for the Justice Fund in the city and county of Los Angeles and how this area is really ground zero for this work. So in terms of just looking at the next slide, in terms of how the Justice Fund has been structured to provide and respond to the immediate needs that we're seeing, the Justice Fund is a very robust, comprehensive program, a very collaborative effort, as you will see here. We have 4 funding partners as part of the Justice Fund. That is a public-private partnership from local government and philanthropy. We also have a data evaluation component, which the Vera Institute of Justice is helping to lead. And then we also have technical assistance and capacity building. And there you see some of the organizations that are listed there. And in a bit, I will elaborate a little bit more about their work and what that looks like. So the next slide shows an overview of the LA Justice Fund grantee partners. And so as the Justice Fund was being implemented, CCF, in partnership with the Weingartz Foundation, coordinated a very rigorous evaluation process to assess the most qualified organizations to provide legal representation to individuals in removal proceedings. And so in addition to the direct representation, the program with the philanthropic dollars are supporting capacity building efforts to strengthen the removal defense pipeline. And all program partners were provided funds to deliver services through a very competitive grant process. Initial grants, as I shared, were awarded in October 2007 under these 3 core strategies for direct legal representation, capacity building, data, and evaluation. So in a bit, when I go over some of the numbers that we've collected thus far in terms of representation, you will see that it really is reflective of the 11 direct service providers that received the funding for direct representation. And so funds are all used according to their restrictions. As a public-private partnership, the blended source of funding allows for a more robust program. And so per city and county policy, public funds are used to support the direct representation. Philanthropic dollars from CCF and Weingartz are helping to provide support for the capacity building efforts that are taking place. After the program was launched in October 2017, and as we were engaging with grantee partners, we learned that, the current immigration enforcement landscape and the complexity it was providing, a lot of organizations were interested in receiving additional support, technical assistance, training, because one of the things the program has been doing is been able to expand the capacity of organizations and allowing organizations to hire and build their removal defense programs. And so in hiring very quickly and bringing new team members from various degrees of experience, there was a need to bring some additional technical assistance to help and support organizations that needed that additional support navigate the complex policy landscape. And so we were able to partner with the California Legal Immigration Network Clinic, and that with additional philanthropic dollars, they were able to hire a dedicated attorney to work with organizations that, were looking or interested in having additional technical assistance and training. And in addition to that, CCF was able to leverage additional resources to hire the Nonprofit Finance Fund. And the Nonprofit Finance Fund is a national nonprofit that provides nonprofit organizations with strategic financial management, consulting services, access to capital, and thought leadership. And so NFF, they have a strong reputation in the philanthropic community, providing strategic financial management support to nonprofit organizations to help them manage and think of how they can strengthen internal systems to manage high complex programs. And so since the program was launched, we're very pleased to share that we were able to add these additional 2 partner organizations. And so now that I shared a little bit about just the evolution of the program, how it's structured and how it's operating, I do want to share just a few brief highlights about the impact that the program has had. And one of the things that I would like to just share before I go into the data is that, the program was started as a pilot program, and in year 1 was really the startup of building an infrastructure and the ramping up of the Justice Fund. And so the program in year 1 was really in its infancy stages, and so a lot of the data that you will see will not really be reflective of the full impact of the program in terms of representation, because a lot of those efforts are still underway, and the work work is still ongoing. However, based on the data that we have collected, we're pleased to share the outcomes for year one. And a more detailed report will be available later this month as part of the Vera Institute of Justice's one-year evaluation report of the Justice Fund that's also underway. So looking at the slide that has the number of 291 clients served, that number is reflective as of December 31, 2018. So as of December 31, 2018, LA Justice Fund legal service providers have provided representation to 291 clients, but as you will see, they have provided over 1,000 consultations. And so we know that the Justice Fund has screened far more clients than it can currently represent. So this means that individuals that may not have been accepted for representation under the Justice Fund did receive at least some initial consultation, a referral, an assessment of their case, which we know also is very significant in their legal journey. And in terms of who are LA Justice Fund clients, as we know, we have 291 clients through December 2018. 9 out of the 10 clients that have been represented have identified vulnerabilities, including victims of crime, domestic violence, human trafficking, and homelessness, among others, per the city and county's guidelines in terms of who should be prioritized for funding under the Justice Fund. And nearly 25% have already filed applications for asylum, U visas, and other protection-based claims. And really what we're seeing is that the Justice Fund is helping to restore dignity and fairness to an imbalanced process. The next slide goes into the capacity building infrastructure. Well, actually right before that, just in terms of the population that's being served, you will see here the next slide that has 15 average years in the United States. It's really referring to the average years of LA Justice Fund clients in the U.S. So what we're seeing based on the data, that these are people that have strong community roots, are part of our economy, and really, have homes and have well-established lives here in the region. 59% were male, 32% female, 8% were LGBTQ, 68% are under the age of 40 years. Knowing that it's a very young, vulnerable population, targeting a lot of the breadwinners of family. And, what we're also seeing is that the vast majority of Justice Fund clients have U.S. citizen children. LA Justice Fund clients have a combined total of 75 children under the age of 18 years old, the vast majority whom are U.S. citizens. The next slide goes into the capacity building infrastructure that is also being created. The removal defense pipeline, so with the philanthropic dollars, how we're able to blend and so leverage the funding is, since the Justice Fund was started, organizations have been able to hire an estimate of approximately 24 attorneys since 2017. In addition, through the leadership of Immigrant Defenders Law Center, they were able to open an Adelanto workspace, which is an office that's about 5 minutes away from the Adelanto Detention Center. They've opened and shared that space with various LA Justice Fund organizations and other partners to help provide working space, because one of the things that we're also seeing is the barriers and challenges in just having access to the Adelanto Detention Center. In addition, through some of the grantees, they've been able to build a removal defense corps, providing basically a litigation toolbox for LA Justice Fund attorneys that includes trainings, additional resources to help strengthen their legal capacity. And then just, the last slide goes into, second to last slide, the startup challenges that we have seen. As we know, the Justice Fund is a pilot program, that's a very new program. There's been a lot of learning along the process, but we are seeing that as the program matures, grantees have reported startup challenges and unexpected barriers that are making lawyering more complex. Oftentimes, grantees are reporting that it takes 4 times the effort to represent clients than it did years ago. Some of the challenges are administrative challenges that organizations are seeing at the Adelanto Detention Center with increased wait time for attorneys to be able to access and see their clients. But there's also been a few structural challenges, as many indicated during public comment regarding just meeting the residency requirements, the criminal carve-out, and some of the other challenges that basically do not prohibit access to services for many of the other individuals that are also in high need of the program. And so just to conclude the presentation, just wanted to share that, why funding should continue beyond year 2. We are already in year 2 of the Justice Fund. Now that we see that there's been a very strong, robust infrastructure for the program, the big question now is the sustainability of the program and what this will look like going forward. And so we know that the program has the potential to have a significant impact. It created and expanded a strong infrastructure to bolster and expand access to legal representation, and we know that the need is great in LA. And Los Angeles is a leader in this issue. We're seeing national momentum across the U.S. The Vera Institute of Justice alone is helping to manage and provide support to over a dozen just removal defense programs across the nation. And we know through our philanthropic organizations at CCF and Weingartz that we're also often approached by other foundations that are looking to expand and build on this model in other regions across the country. And so we know that and are encouraged to see the overall progress and look forward to continue to partner with the city to see how we can continue to support and advance the critical work that is taking place. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation and happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Okay. Wait for the next speaker before we move forward to questions. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm just here to support with questions, so.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Colleagues, Mr. Rue.
Great presentation, very comprehensive.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
No comments. Good presentation.
Ms. Martinez?
Oh, yeah, I have a couple of questions. So how did the service providers get assigned to a case? Was it based on the specialty of the service provider, the proximity to the client, or the service provider's capacity? How was that determined?
In terms, just to clarify, in how the grants were determined, organization? Yeah, so once the policy framework was approved by city and county in July of 2017, we were able to work with that framework to create an RFP process. We ended up receiving close to 40 applications at that time. And so I know that one of the priorities the city and the county had expressed is that they wanted to fund organizations that had at least 3 to 5 years of experience providing removal defense. So as we were evaluating applications, we were applying a lot of the guidelines per the policy, and so, but really looking that organizations had the capacity, the infrastructure to provide removal defense work, looking at overall organizational leadership, financial sustainability, that organizations also just had a good financial track record, but also the organization's leadership and, history in doing work in this space, because one of the things that we know is that it is very difficult work to provide removal defense work, and it really takes a lot of expertise, and so organizations that really had that knowledge and background were able to advance in the application process.
So let me ask it a different way. So once you awarded the grant to the service provider, how did you then ensure that the case was a right fit for that service provider? What if the case was so complicated that maybe that service provider did not meet that person's need and you perhaps needed a different service provider? I'm trying to make sure that the people we're serving are being represented by people who have the capacity to do so. Some of these cases can be very, very lengthy and very, very complicated. So how are we ensuring that we're meeting the person's needs?
So, overall for CCF, as the program administrator, we, once we determined based on their budget proposals and overall allocation and how they demonstrated that they could carry on the proposed work they were sharing, we went ahead and, they have a grant agreement. We don't oversee the day-to-day activities at the organization. We really trust and empower them to make those decisions. But what we do is we do have a very rigorous reporting structure. Organizations have to submit monthly data through Vera's database the 5th day, I believe, of every month. And then in addition to that, they submit quarterly reports to CCF. So the reporting is very rigorous for the Justice Fund. And so through those reports, we're able to document and see the organization's progress and ability to carry out the work.
Do you have any, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I can add, this is more anecdotal than, Rosie can speak to how the program is run. But, as you heard from a lot of the folks who gave public comment earlier today, they call themselves the Detained Collaborative, right? These are groups of various organizations that are all going out to the detention centers and taking these cases. And so there's a high level of collaboration among the groups. And so I would imagine that as folks are doing intake and finding cases that one or another may have expertise, they're working that out amongst
That's good. That's a good thing. Do we have any idea what the average cost is per case? I know that the severity of the cases vary, but do we have any idea what the average cost is to provide services for one client?
Yeah, I would say that's part of what we're working on in the various outcomes and evaluations that we're doing for CCF. I know one way we can't do it, which is look at the number of cases that have been done and the number of dollars.
And that's where I'm having a hard time
Right,
with.
yeah.
So
Because
you know where I'm
there's so
going with
many
this. It's
other-
like, how do you know how to fund it if we don't really have a sense as to what each case really costs?
Right.
And again, I get it. The severity of the cases vary.
Yes, I mean, on average, we know that in these type of cases, and Stacey, correct me if I'm wrong, but attorneys can take up to maybe about 20 to 30 cases, depending on the complexity of cases and the attorney's experience. But on average, for removal defense caseload, I believe that's the average.
Yeah, and something we're working on at Vera, both in LA and then in the 12 cities around the country we work with in what we call the SAFE network, is trying to really figure that out. And what I think we've learned is that a per case cost is almost impossible to figure out because you said some are kind of easier, some are more complex, and so these caseload.
Maybe we can separate it by categories. The more complex cases would take how much money to.
Sure, yeah,
But you're working towards that goal, getting a sense as to what each case costs?
We are, through the Vera evaluation and also through the work that the Nonprofit Finance Fund was brought on board to do, is to work with organizations to help identify what is the true cost of a legal representation. But we know that it's a very tricky number. It's not always apples to apples, right? And so, but that's definitely something that we're looking into.
Okay. The other question I had, Mr. Chair, is the report states that 1,035 individuals were screened. Yes?
Before we go forward, let me
Okay.
make a comment. So, but there is, separate from the substantive discussion and the quality and nature of the cases, this is just math. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's 36,846 cases in California, half of them in Los Angeles, which means 18,423. If we spend $8 million, that's $6,000 per case. So then the question for us is, how do we scale so that the other 17,099 cases are addressed? Right? And how does that compare on best practices? How does that compare on this network versus people who do this in the private sector? And so how does this compare? So someone who's not part of this network, but who does this privately?
Yes.
Right? And Enrique Arevalo in Pasadena, how much would this cost? How much would he do this case for?
Yeah, I think so. Just 2 points. I think one is through the Justice Fund, because it's a new program. The first 6 months of the program were really the ramp-up phase. So a lot of organizations were hiring their attorneys. Some organizations, it is a very competitive field. We're not able to hire attorneys probably till like 3 to 4 or 5 months into the program. So that type of data, I think, is what we're going to be able to capture going forward. Overall, CCF, and I know with Weingartz and collaborating with other philanthropic organizations, there's a lot of conversation in the field about how do we really assess the unmet legal services need and also what it would take to really fund and support the legal. So we're part of a funders collaborative right now that is looking at conducting a statewide assessment, also looking at Los Angeles to see, how do we learn more about what that looks like, just based on the initial numbers we're seeing from the Justice Fund. And again, a lot of the cases are still open, so these numbers are not final. But we know that, right now the average has been at least 6,000 or so per case, which is a big saving.
33.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to be, Mr. Chair, I think I still had the floor. But let me just.
I know that, but I want, just on this point, though, because I want us to, you asked the question. And
I'm trying to be nice about it, but it's an integral part of your funding request. We need to know what these cases cost.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It's a legitimate question. And the only thing for us right now is with the data that we do have. And because this is still in the initial phase, it's, a lot of the cases that are they're still open and undergoing. And a lot of these cases take up to 5 years. So in order to see that, we're going to have to, there's going to be certain phases of data that we will have to wait and see until we get more information.
Yeah, and I'd also want to add to that, something we'll have to parse out as we think about this is what a case costs versus what the program costs, right? So the program has all these other services, and then also, I think what folks were pointing to during the public comment about the residency requirement and the criminal carve-out is that there's a lot of legwork that goes into just figuring out if someone is eligible for the program.
What's the percent in terms of the carve-out as it is to the general population? There's 18,000 people, 18,423. What percent of those people have a criminal record of violent crime and a felony violent crime?
That's what we're talking about.
Out of the 18,423.
So we don't have that data available, but happy to see if there's anything with our partners that we can pull together. But to my knowledge, we don't have that data.
Less than 100%, somewhere between 1% and 100%.
I would not be able to provide an answer right now.
Now the 1,324, last question, is both categories combined. It's the 291 cases and then the other services that you provided. So that reduces the number. That's separate from, distinguished between the 291 cases and the other activities.
The 1,000?
Yep.
So 291 cases are actual cases that LA Justice Fund grantees have been able to take on and provide representation. The 1,000 consultations are people that have received a consultation, but organizations have not been able to accept for representation. And many times it's because they don't meet the residency requirements, they don't meet the Justice Fund guidelines. And so because of that, organizations are not able to advance or provide representation, but do, at least in that initial stage, provide that initial screening and consultation. And oftentimes that's a referral to say, well, we can assist you, but here might be some additional resources, or here's at least, a little bit more resources and information to help you with your case.
And if I could add.
You know, as you stated, much of this is anecdotal, and that's, and I appreciate that. But there's also measures, right? And so the larger number, which helped reduce the cost per case, was 1326. If we go, we need to know how many of these cases that you say that this is a factor. How many cases is it a factor? Is it a factor for 5 cases? Is it a factor for 5%? Is it a factor for half of them? Is it a factor, right? So that it gives meaning to us in terms of us trying to think with you how we can make this more efficient to make sure that we are representing as many people as possible during this time period.
Yeah, you will have more details and information. So I know Vera is in process of finalizing the year 1 evaluation, and it will be looking at some of these questions. So that report is expected to go out this month, and so that report will include a much more detailed overview of the program's overall impact to date in terms of implementation, but also overall impact.
Can I go back to
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So the report states that 1,035 individuals were screened by the program. How did that amount turn into 223 cases? How were other people screened out?
Sorry, which number are you referring to?
So in the report I'm reading, I have 1,035 individuals were screened by the LA Justice Fund program.
Yes.
And so out of the people who were screened, how did that amount turn into 223 cases? How did you screen them out? How did you end up with 223?
All organizations have an intake and screening process, so they, have their own intake sheets where they follow and ask key questions to see if that person meets the Justice Fund criteria. And once they meet that criteria, then if they have the ability to provide that representation, they will take on the case. But if it doesn't, it just stays as a screening.
So it depends on the service provider.
Yes.
And the last question I had, Mr. Chair, is so how are you then ensuring that the service providers close out the 177 cases that remained open?
So in terms of, well, the cases...
I'm just looking at the numbers in the report, so I don't know if your numbers are different than mine, but in the report that I read, you still have, so you took on 223 cases.
Oh, yes.
Out of the 223 cases, you have 117 cases still open. So how are we going to ensure that we move forward in this last quarter of service to make sure those cases get closed out?
Well, I mean, those are all open, ongoing cases. It really is a case-by-case basis, so
These
depending,
cases go up to 5 years?
it could
like
be
you
up to
were-
5 years, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's it, Mr. Chair, thank you.
And if I could just add to something we were talking about earlier, the difference between the 1,035 consultations and the 291 clients, I'd say a lot of those folks who got screened out may likely have been because of the residency requirement. And just to clarify, it's not always that folks aren't residents, it's also that the proof required to kind of show that they're residents, show that they have ties to LA is something that's not available to them. So just because someone doesn't meet the residency requirement
Yeah,
doesn't mean they don't have
Yeah,
ties to Los
I get that.
Angeles.
Okay. But the numbers I read to you are the same numbers in your report, right? I mean, the one that.
Oh, I believe the numbers on that other document are from Q3, and that's as of September 30 of last year. And so we're in process of submitting the Q4. So the 291 is as of December 31st.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So if we just look at the cases, as of December 1st, the 291, the case cost is $27,000. How does that compare to the private sector for a comparable activity?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I repeat that I definitely understand what you're saying. There are 291 cases represented, this number of dollars, but a lot of those dollars did go to startup costs, they're going to capacity building, they're going to pro bono, et cetera.
All understood.
And so, $27,000 a case obviously sounds very high, but it's not kind of what's happening in practice. And you'd expect that, you'd see that number go down over the years as these organizations kind of are now stabilized, they're able to accept more
No,
cases.
the first number I gave you was all of them together. And in fact, I'm trying to be as generous as possible in saying that you're at $6,000 per person who walks in the door. But trying to figure out how we.
Yes.
Brilliant presentations on the incredible need, but we've got to be effective.
Yeah, I will say,
We got to be the maximum of effectiveness.
Right. I do want to say we have been working very closely with the partners to capture the unmet need and answer some of these questions. And it is.
The unmet need is $17,099.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so, and all of those are considerations that we're looking as we continue to gather the data and working very hard with all the organizations to see what it is that we can capture. But overall, it is something that just beyond the Justice Fund, the legal service field, whether from philanthropic community, we're all working to try to determine and figure out what that looks like. What is the need? What does it truly cost to provide direct representation for removal defense? So a lot of that, there's a lot of work underway. And so as we, at least through the Justice Fund, can continue to capture data to help us provide additional details, we will be reporting and sharing that with the committee.
The state has an incredible surplus in its budget right now. It's led by Democratic leadership. The state senator for this area is a woman who has a long history in advocating and defending immigrants, and yet we have no support from the state. Have you guys endeavored in any efforts to have the state play a role in this?
I know at the beginning of the Justice Fund that was being explored, but at this time we have not engaged.
And there are state efforts underway that I know advocates are working on getting some additional funding for representation in this area, but I can't give a detailed report on what's happening there. But I do know there are conversations happening for sure.
That's a great, excellent point.
And
There's a
perhaps y'all
body
could.
of advocates
No,
there
they
who
all
have
show
a
up
rich
to the
history.
rallies there. Everyone shows up to the press conference, but no one shows up with a check.
Yep.
That's how that works.
There's also an incredible body of advocates here who have great experience in Sacramento.
I don't.
There could be straightforward legislation with a price tag on it, and it can be funded by the state. They have an extraordinary surplus right now.
Yeah. The one thing for CCF that we definitely also want to highlight and just has been a reminder in terms of just also how fragile the nonprofit legal services infrastructure has been. And so programs like the Justice Fund are very historic in a way that even for CCF being funding in immigration and, with Weingartz, we many times were the very only few funders in this region funding legal services at some point. And so we have seen that it's been a very underserved area, and And so now, for the first time in many years, at historic levels, we're starting to see new investments. So part of this, and why a lot of the data has been challenging, is because it literally is now building that infrastructure and that capacity. And so a lot of that data, I know, is I remember when we all thought at one point we might get close to some form of immigration reform, there were a lot of conversations underway to see what would it take for the state of California to fund and implement legal services, and not just for removal defense, but for the affirmative services. And so there's definitely a lot of work underway, and through different collaboratives we're part of, we're going to continue to monitor and see how we can identify additional information.
Mr. Rue? Mr. Price? Ms. Martinez?
No, I concluded my question.
I thank you for your presentation. I applaud your work. I know you're being as diligent as the challenges demand. It would help, particularly the Vera Institute that has such a great experience, capacity, leadership in this area, to help us be more finite in terms of these numbers, so that we can be more affirmative in our advocacy for funding and for amplifying the program. Thank you. Thank all of you for being here today.
Thank you.
Any other things on the docket?
There were actually comment cards submitted after. It's your discretion if you'd like to hear them, sir.
No. They're late, right? Anything else on the docket?
No, that clears the desk.
Okay, clears the desk. Motion to adjourn. Colleen? Move. Thank you for staying. So move.